We're going to talk about a machine that was born out of pure desperation, a fighter plane that didn't just change the air war in the Pacific, it ended up completely dominating it. This is the story of the Grumman F6F Hellcat.
She flies like a trainer. That's a really weird thing to say about a 12,000-pound beast of a warplane, right? Especially one nicknamed the Hellcat. But that little contradiction, that's the key to understanding its genius. How could a machine be so easy to fly, but so incredibly unforgiving to its enemies?
Because let's be clear, in early 1942, things were looking grim. The U.S. Navy was seriously on the back foot, getting hammered by a superior enemy fighter. They needed a game changer, and they needed it yesterday.
So, to really get the Hellcat, you first have to understand the problem it was built to solve. And that problem had a name, the legendary Japanese A6M0. At the time, the U.S. Navy's main fighter was the Grumman F4F Wildcat. Now, it was a tough little plane, for sure, and it packed a punch. But against the Zero, it was just outclassed. The Zero was like a featherweight champion. It was incredibly agile, and its climb rate was phenomenal. It could literally fly circles around the Wildcat, dictating the terms of every single fight. American pilots were in a terrible spot, and the losses were just piling up. The Navy needed a purpose-built Zero killer. And the same company that built the Wildcat, Grumman, had a very different idea about how to get it done. Grumman had this nickname, the Iron Works, and for good reason. Their whole thing wasn't about making light, nimble fighters. No, they built flying tanks. Aircraft so incredibly tough, they could take a ridiculous amount of punishment and still somehow bring their pilots home. So they decided, you know what, we're not going to build a better Zero. We're going to build a plane that can just flat out overpower. And the development was just breathtakingly fast. Grumman was clever. They actually proposed the whole thing as an upgrade just to get the contract pushed through quickly. The first prototype flew in June of '42, and it showed promise, but it was underpowered. But here's the genius part. The engineers had secretly designed the airframe from day one for the most powerful engine they could get their hands on, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. And when they dropped that 2,000 horsepower monster into the nose, the Hellcat was truly born.
And this new machine? It was absolutely built for dominance. You're talking overwhelming firepower with 650 caliber machine guns. The cockpit was armored, it had self-sealing fuel tanks, all things the Zero just didn't have. It even had wide landing gear to make those terrifying carrier landings a little safer. And with that massive engine, it had a huge speed advantage. It could not turn a Zero, no way. But it could outrun it, outclimb it, and outpunch it every single time.
So with this new weapon in hand, the U.S. Navy was finally ready to turn the tide. And its big moment, its defining moment, would come in one of the largest air battles in all of history.
Okay, so the theory was sound. The design was incredibly powerful. But how would this new Ironworks fighter actually perform when it was up against hundreds of enemy planes in a real fight?
Well, the strategy was pretty straightforward. American pilots were taught one simple rule. Don't play the Zero's game. No turning dogfights. Period. Instead, they used the Hellcat's insane speed and horsepower to boom and zoom. You dive on your opponent from way up high, you make one devastating firing pass, and then you use all that power to climb straight back up, leaving the Zeros way below, completely unable to follow. Simple, brutal, and effective.
And this tactic was put to the ultimate test on June 19, 1944. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The Japanese launched a massive, all-out attack, sending over 300 aircraft to hit the U.S. fleet. And waiting for them, 443 Navy Hellcats. What happened next wasn't really a battle, it was a massacre.
The result was so completely lopsided that the American pilots started calling it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Japanese lost over 200 aircraft in a single day. The Americans, they lost just 22 Hellcats. In one afternoon, the Hellcat didn't just win a battle. It basically wiped out Japan's naval air power for the rest of the war. And that turkey shoot, well, it wasn't a fluke. It was a sign of things to come, and it was backed up by some of the most lopsided statistics in the entire history of aerial warfare.
First off, American industry was just churning these things out at an unbelievable rate. Over 12,000 Hellcats were built. So many, in fact, that at one point, Grumman was building them faster than the Navy could even take delivery, which meant the carriers were never, ever short of their best fighter. And just think about the impact of that industrial power. This one single type of airplane was responsible for 75% 3/4 of all air-to-air victories by the U.S. Navy in the whole war. That's more than every other type of Navy fighter, combined.
And that leads us to the final, just staggering number. The Hellcat's final kill ratio was 19-1. For every single Hellcat that was lost in combat, it destroyed 19 enemy aircraft. It's one of the most successful fighters ever built.
So what's the Hellcat's ultimate legacy? Well, it wasn't just about the incredible numbers. It was about who was flying it.
The Hellcat got another nickname, the Ace Maker. Why? Because it was rugged, stable, and surprisingly easy to fly. It forgave the mistakes that new pilots would make while giving veteran aces a platform to be absolutely devastating. It was this perfect combo of power and simplicity that allowed 306 Navy pilots to become aces. That's 5 or more confirmed kills. By achieving total air superiority, it protected the fleet and made the whole island-hopping campaign across the Pacific possible.
And this brings us all the way back to that central question. The Hellcat proved that you don't have to beat your enemy at their own game. When you're faced with a nimble, agile opponent, the answer isn't always to copy them. Sometimes the answer is a counter, a machine that wins through brute force, through sheer survivability and overwhelming power. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What truly wins a conflict? Finesse or just raw, undeniable strength?